As you join us from all over, you're very welcome to Behavioural Science Club, joining us again. And whilst everybody's joining, maybe you'd just like to type into the chat where you're joining us from. Truly global group of people we have here. And nice to see Lashazar again, Holly, Adela, all our nice regular guests. Rachel, Hamza, Priyanka, lovely to see you all. SK, Renusha, can see everyone signing in there. Andy, and as I say, as you join in, I'm just going to type in. I don't know if anyone knows where Skerries is. In Dublin, I'm on the sea in Ireland. Lovely, lovely to see you all signing in. And everybody knows I like to be very prompt as well. So I'm going to kick off straight away and you can all just join the conversation as you join us. And today we're very lucky to be joined by Julia Hobsbawm. Julia is an entrepreneur and she's an author. And we're going to be talking about her book today, The Simpisti Principle. There's a website about it as well. There's lots of detail. You can look it up if you haven't heard about it afterwards when we finish the session. Recommended by none less than Arianna Huffington on the front cover, which is quite a joy for you, I'm sure, Julia. And I'll just tell our members a little bit about the book and then we'll come together for a chat. So the Simplicity Principle is based on two central ideas: keep it simple and learn from nature. And it's about a new kind of health, our social health, which is how we connect to our lives, each other, and technology in the digital era. And Julia had a great impact in her life from Maya Angelou. Keep it simple, sweetie, was her turn of phrase that Julia came to love so much. And she asked us to remember that the humans in the machine age, we're still in the driving seat. And that one of the reasons we struggle with complexity is that our brains are not wired to handle excess information. Our ability to cope with excess stimulation is in fact very limited, and neuroscience shows us that once things get too complicated, our brains effectively short circuit and cut out. So, Julia, why don't you tell our members today why you decided to put this book together? Let's go right from the start.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm joining you from London. Still, the most precious commodity we have, other than our health, is our time. As I know, a lot of you are joining, or some of you are joining from India, which I hope you and your families are well and safe, and sorry that you're going through a bad wave of COVID. I'm a writer and I'm an entrepreneur. You probably all know more about the technicalities of behavioural science than me. I'm totally sort of self-made, self-taught, and I'm a bit of a collector of ideas. But I began to write. I've always been interested in the communications age. I had a career in communications. I used to write about the relationship between PR and journalism, for example, back in the analog era, before digital, before we were being forced as humans to coexist with humans, with machines, in such depth and intimacy that our lives are now, as we all know, completely embroiled and interchangeable with the machines, dependent on them. So I've always been curious about the way information is transferred and communication happens. And I wrote a book in 2017 called Fully Connected: Surviving and Thriving in an Age of Overload. And I wrote about the way in which technology was being sold to us as simplicity, that it made our lives better. And I thought it didn't. But I was writing really about the the impact on our physical and our emotional and our mental health and what I called social health. That was my lens through which I was looking at the question of humans and technology in the book Fully Connected. And I flew a bit of a kite really about this idea of social health, which is quite simply that the original definition of health, unchanged actually since 1948 and the origin of the World Health Organization, was that health is, and I quote, the presence of physical, mental and social well-being, not merely the absence of injury and disease. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting because social well-being in 1948 meant class. It meant the physical robustness of a population to actually fight poverty and even fight wars. It didn't mean connecting in an always-on era. And the book did pretty well in that it had me continuously on the speaker circuit talking about this idea of overload and digital detox and our relationship to the information era. And then I thought, well, really what I'm espousing is a form of chosen simplicity and a repudiation of complexity. And I became interested. I mean, my positioning in the marketplace, if you like, is I'm a sort of everyday business writer. So the Simpisti Principle is one best business book in America, but in general well-being. So, you know, I'm not at the kind of textbook end of the market, but I'm really interested in real people's lives and real business lives. So I began to almost asset strip the core idea from Fully Connected and to realize, as much as anything else for my own benefit, that it was about simplicity. And it was about the idea that we crave it. The more the modern world gives us intricacies and limitlessness in the possibilities, that actually what we are, as we can see in the market for simplicity, you know, Calm, the app, you know, has multiplied in its valuation, just to give one example. You know, simplicity and minimalism and reconnecting to nature is fashionable. And so I just wanted to explore that. And then just briefly, before I stop for Louise to maybe quiz me as she's read the book, I really wanted to create a model that said, how can you practically embrace simplicity when everything is so complex? What does that actually look like? And what would a simplicity principle be? And my final point is that everything is a balance between one end of a spectrum and another. I'm not denying complexity. I'm not even advocating that we always choose simplicity over complexity. That would be ridiculous. And I hope that I'm an advocate for understanding what simplicity is, and it isn't about being simplistic. That in fact, simplicity is a sophisticated response to a complex condition. But I believe the world needs simplicity. I believe that we've seen governments struggle with the complexity of policy making during a global crisis because they don't know what simplicity is. So I feel that the politics of simplicity are very real, even though the book itself addresses it at a quite granular level, which is, you know, how to embrace it and how to create it and what that's based on. And perhaps, Louise, we can talk about the model of the number 6 and the hexagon shape.
Absolutely. That's a super introduction, Julia, for everybody who's maybe unfamiliar with the book. And I'm delighted that you brought up the balance, because I've written down here something that really resonated with me. You say, as we turn to technology, the less we rely on humans to keep what we learn, share and use to manageable proportions. It's a mistake. Humans have an inbuilt complexity bias and natural inclination to make things complicated. And I think that I totally agreed with that, Julia. Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I'm interested in I'm interested in productivity. I'm interested in how we get things done and why perhaps we don't get things done and what gets in the way. So I really began to sort of read a bit of the literature around complexity and around behavioural science and bias and so on and so forth. And you've got this funny tension. On the one hand, mindfulness has been successful because it has connected people to the pleasure of letting go, of holding many, many thoughts in our minds and being active the whole time. You know, there is a reason more than marketing why mindfulness has landed in this, the advancing 21st century. But the reality is the human being is about the most complex organism on the earth. And we are naturally biased to be curious and to be complex and to be distracted, which is, of course, why, and I mean, forgive me, I don't have the pleasure of knowing what you all do. I'm sure many of you, you know, are well ahead of me in terms of understanding the algorithmic-based strategies of technology manufacturers, but the simple underlying principle, as you know, of any tech business dealing with eyeballs and attention is to stimulate the desire for distraction and stimulation and dopamine hits that the human brain has. And there's a really interesting piece of research I came across, which again, several of you may already know, forgive me, called by Gloria Marks at the University of Irvine in California, which pretty much shows that it takes us around about 23 minutes and 17 seconds to regain our attention once we have been distracted. In other words, when I come off this call, when you come off this call, I'm not going to be able to just do whatever I want to do next without any break at all. I'm going to, it's almost like the wiring in my head is going to go fuzzy, and I'm going to need to eat something or drink something or sit quietly and absorb what's happened before I do my next task. And one of my worries has been is that we have not accepted the inbuilt complexity that we require space in order to get things done properly, and that in the technology age, the digital age, we are being sold simplicity, but given complexity, delivered complexity. What I mean by that is we are being told that we need to be on endless different devices with different operating software and different platforms. And we're being told that there is limitless time when there actually isn't. And so I'm just fascinated by this tension between the complex and the simple, and wanting us as the people involved, never mind about robots and AI and whether or not we're all going to get, you know, outsourced to them, and that discussion, which I'm very happy to have. But I mean, I think we know that the human is quite superior to the, with our intuition and our emotions and our behaviors at the moment. But what interests me is how we navigate and negotiate that space from the simple to the complex. And the headline is, we need a model, we need a pattern, we need to mirror what goes on in nature, which is if we just have absolute limitless choice and, you know, begin a fresh day with a blank sheet of paper with no rhythm, no pattern, no routine, no shape, I think that makes our lives much harder.
So that's a great segue then, Julia, on to explain to everybody the whole idea of the power of 6 and the shape construct that you advocate that we use, and possibly a little quick side bit about your love of bees.
Okay, well, so I've been writing quite a lot over the years in a sort of how-to way about, you know, how to manage overload and digital detox. And, you know, in a way I came late to the strategy side of Simpisti, although I now do consult on the strategy side of Simpisti, and I have a website and a podcast, and I write for strategy and business, and I wrote a piece based on the Simpisti Principle for strategy and business, which is online, and it turned out to be the fourth most, not the sixth, not the third, unfortunately, the fourth most downloaded piece in the whole of last year. So it was really interesting to me that simplicity was resonating. But I began at a strategic level, and I've just written another piece that's about to come out with a simplicity strategy I'm happy to share with you ahead of its publication. But the point is that I wanted a practical process, and I thought long and hard about what that should be. And my starting point was this working memory limit, the cognitive limit that is the number 7. That broadly speaking, the Herman Miller number from the 50s, that broadly speaking, if you have more than about 7 things going on, you cut out. And we all know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And even though he added another layer, really there's lots and lots of disciplines that point to the idea that once you go above 7, so that was my immediate framework. But I wanted an organizing image, an organizing number that had a good image to go with it, and I wanted a shape. So I started to think about the number 6, because that's the nearest number to 7 that's got a very nice shape in geometry and nature, which is of course the hexagon. Enter the hexagon, and so really there is an amazingly interesting symmetry that I have to say I stumbled across between 6 itself and the 6-sided hexagon. And just to give you the quick version, 6 turns out to be, in geometry, in mathematics, the original so-called perfect number. Now, I'm the least mathematical person on the planet. I run a business adequately, but I mean, I'm not a mathematician. But I was very interested in the idea that, Euclid of Alexandria, back in 4th century BC Greece, discovered that in a suite of numbers, the number 6 is perfect because the integers 1, 2, and 3 fit into it, fold into it. And I just thought as a management number, that made it really interesting, because management is all about getting things done, and it's about symmetry. And so that was interesting to me. Now, there are other bigger numbers, but one of the things about the perfect numbers is they start to get really, really big. So the next perfect number up from 6 is, I think, 24 or 28. So then I looked at culture, at sport, religion, and the 6 is everywhere. I mean, I know you can make the case for other numbers, but really the 6 is quite special. Whether it's the number in a Braille cell, whether it's the number on the Seder plate, whether it's 6. I'm very bad at sport, forgive me, especially if you love cricket, but there's 6 somethings in an over. There's all sorts of things about 6 and sport that started to kind of get the old juices going. The axioms of faith in Islam, and so on. So that got me interested. And then I was looking for a shape. So I started to look at the hexagon. And again, I didn't know what to expect. I really tried to be open-minded. One of the things why I think this book has landed and succeeded and is building up a bit of a following is because I really took my time. I took about a year deciding on the 6 and the hexagon to stress test it, because otherwise it would have just been easy to, write a piece for Medium and go, here, the 6 and the hexagon, la, la, la. And I wanted to examine it. And I'm very interested and have written a lot about networks and network science. And any of you who know about network science will know that it's all about the edges and the borders and the nodes and the intersections. In other words, the popularization of networks is the circle. But I thought that was the wrong image for a containment strategy, because circles are a bit limitless, whereas the edges of the hexagon were immediately interesting to me. And then I found out that it is not the most, but it's up there as one of the most space efficient and resilient in the whole of nature. Not only is a snowflake highly individual and six-sided, and that was interesting, but graphite and graphene, the strongest structures that all emanate around the carbon atom. There's not really anything the carbon atom doesn't do that doesn't involve forming hexagonal lattices. And then I came across the bees. Now, the bees are one of the most interesting organizing social organism species, superorganism species. They have a lot in common with humans in terms of the way they organize. So do ants, but bees are really interesting because of their hierarchy and their equality, their relationships. The antennae on the bee is quite extraordinary. Bees dance and communicate to each other. And the hive is hexagonal. And I was still wavering at this point. I was still thinking, am I really going with 6 and hexagon? Is there enough? Is there enough? Is there enough? And I read an article in Nature about what happens when the hives are first made. Hives, by the way, are the resilient, porous, space-efficient place in which the pollen is stored, in which the wax is made, in which the honey is secreted, and so on. And it's this. When the bees first make the hives, they make them out of circular balls of wax, okay? But they harden into hexagons, and they harden into hexagons. And I think it's Charles Darwin even tried to stop that process, tried to keep them at the circular stage, and it didn't work. And why they harden into hexagons is because they're so strong and so efficient and space-saving. And at that point, I thought, I'm not going to resist anymore. That's my theory. Hexagon action, the number 6. And then the book is, in fact, a play on that concept. There are 36 different ideas across 6 chapters. But I make the point that it's really a series of ingredients from which I invite you to cook and create your own recipe. It is not a rigid one-size-fits-all endeavor. It's about saying, does it appeal to you conceptually? Does it help you adapt your behavior, whether you're running a division or a company or your own life? And yeah, the feedback appears to be, maybe it does, for some people anyway.
Thank you, Julia. I'm keen to hand you over to Prakash, but just before you do, I'm just going to tell everybody who's joined us here today to develop on what Julia's been talking to you about, and that's that the 6 sectors of the shape that Julia advocates are clarity, individuality, reset, knowledge, networks, and time. And then within each of those 6, Julia gives an axiom of 6 words to develop on the idea. And then within each 6 factors of it are explored, which is how we get to the 36 that Julia was mentioning. I'll share some more details in the group afterwards, and of course you can look Julia's book up. I'm going to hand you over to Prakash now. Thanks very much, Julia, for introducing and giving us so much detail about the book.
Thank you so much, Louise. For folks who have joined in and who have not had their hands on a copy of the book as yet, I put up a link out there. It's a Google Books preview link. So you can't read the entire book, but almost some 30 pages of the books are out there. You can take a look at the contents.
Well, and you can, the piece on the strategy and business is free. And my podcast, The Simplicity Principle, I've just begun to start recording for the second series, actual lessons from the book, whereas the first series is interviews with sort of global public figures about the concept of simplicity. But actually, I've written so much about it. I'd love you all to buy the book, of course I would. But if you don't want to, there's many ways. If you Google me and the Simpisti Principle, you will just get a lot of it.
Thank you so much, Julia. So guys, take a look at that book. Obviously check out the podcast or writings. Fantastic resource out there. So why not? Why not? Now, I was thinking about this time, in the past when I was working with this particular company, I was responsible for a certain team. And that was the one thought which came under my mind when I kind of read the preview of the book, read the titles, the 6, and thank you for the number of the beast, like everywhere 666. So it was quite fun. I'm like, okay, Iron Maiden, there's this one book which you guys want to read. So what happened was the challenge we were trying to solve, and this is in the past, talking 8-10 years back, was to make the company more innovative. And innovation was a buzzword right around the beginning of the last decade, 2010, 2011, 12. And my boss said, we have to become more innovative. And I think the solution that they came up with was, which makes sense if you look at it from one point of view, everybody must give one innovative idea a week. That's it. So people are working for 40, 45 weeks in a year. There's 40, 45 ideas per person. If you have got some, 2,000, 3,000 people in the company, can you imagine the number of ideas we have got? And then now we'll become an innovative company. And then so from there, it went down to creating SharePoints, logging the ideas. And now the entire focus was on who has given how many ideas. And it's a Friday, and Louise, your idea is still not here because it's the end of the week. And Rachel, I'm celebrating you because you gave 4 ideas, and I'm yelling at Sharon because her team members are not giving the ideas, and now she's yelling at her team members. It was not a fun stage at all. I mean, you can imagine we didn't become an innovative company. And we actually were making our life much more complex by measuring, creating reports, creating system around stupid things. In retrospect now, right? So very late to ask, but why is it that each one of us individually know the answer? You need to make almost life has to become simple. The moment you say to someone, they will nod and say, yes, you're right, you got a point. I mean, it's the obvious thing. But together, when they're coming down as an organization, as a team, why is it that addition becomes the default mode, not subtraction? Julia, question number 1. Question number 2 was, I noticed you said in your book, the cat versus the kiss, and we all know the kiss, keep it simple, stupid. But what is the cat? Okay. Let's start with these two.
Well, that's a great question. Subtraction and addition. Well, imagine your bedroom and how it accumulates, or my bedroom does, clutter, books and bits and things. And, it takes conscious willpower, motivation, strategy, tactics to own something that might have become overgrown or needs pruning and refining. And coming back to the point about if we're all too overloaded, we forget the simple strategy that if you sit for 6, as I advocate, and I do myself, I sit for 6 several times a day, and I just sit. I'm not even really meditating. I'm just sitting and going, whoa, what's happening here? Especially as I often use it as a screen wipe from going from, something like this to something else. Because if we don't, we easily get overwhelmed. And I think when we get overwhelmed, we add. I mean, take addictive eating. I put my hand up to that. I usually do that when I'm overwhelmed. I don't do that when I'm feeling like I'm on top of everything. So I think some of you will know more than I about the behavioral mechanism of that. But I think that we naturally multiply and make things more complex than we need to. The cat versus the kiss is that the KISS principle, KISS, originated in the modern iteration You know, forget Aristotle and the ancient desire for, you know, embracing simplicity, which is, of course, very well documented. William of Ockham, Ockham's razor, is a 14th century adage. You know, why make things complicated when you can keep them simple? But in a modern context, in the 1940s, the American Air Force adapted a design mantra: keep it simple, stupid. And Maya Angelou, the late great Black American activist and writer, she had a more feminist incarnation of that. And she used to say to me, I had the great privilege and pleasure of being her young book publicist when I was in my 20s. She used to say to me, why be brutal, you know, and be a bit generous? And so keep it simple, sweetie. But the opposite face of simplicity is complexity. And I call the cat syndrome complexity, anxiety, and time. When we work in an environment where our deadlines are set for us and might not be realistic, and we have overload, and we are not in a culture where we can call things out and say, but my idea, my innovation is to say we should do this differently. You know, I mean, a lot of emphasis on innovation is new ideas, adding. But what about an old idea, which is, are we doing this right? Is everyone feeling good about this? Okay, so anxiety is very, very prevalent in the workplace. Excuse me, you only have to know that through the epidemic stress levels globally. I mean, in the European Union, in the area that I live in, of course, we're not in the EU anymore politically, but, you know, 60% of working days lost before the pandemic were ascribed to stress. $300 billion in America are lost out of the economy every year, again, pre-pandemic figures, to stress. Productivity pre-pandemic was stagnant at about 1.2% around the world, in spite of all this marvelous new technology. So for me, there's a correlation between dysfunction and complexity and anxiety, which is not actually the same as mental well-being and mental health. It's about something else. It's about not well-run operations. So I just put the cat against the kiss, and I know what I'd like more of and what I'd like less of.
A pretty neat example out there. Julia, with the first question, now why addition versus why not subtraction? Is it also possible that if you look at incentive structures, right? Let's say me, Louise, Peter, Mariah, Shruti, let's say we all are reporting to you and you are our boss, and this is a workspace. And when a boss is evaluating our performance, right? And that's one thing always there in our mind, you know, when you're trying to work. I know that me bringing something makes you look at me and say, he bought something new out here. He bought something new, right? So that is that, could that also be a reason that the way we evaluate people's competence, the way we evaluate who is a good employee, who is more productive employee, and the metrics that we use is what did you bring new, as opposed to what did you remove?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, look, both my books, and in fact, my next book is called The Nowhere Office. And again, I've just published a paper online, a 15,000 word paper online that you can get if you Google called The Nowhere Office. And there's actually a podcast of that called The Nowhere Office, because in a way they're interrelated, because really what I'm interested in is why are our working selves so asymmetrical? With pleasure and creativity and satisfaction and productivity. And so simplicity and the Nowhere Office actually are aligned. It's a very interesting framing you've just given, Prakash. The narratives that build up in business that get really, really big are that you've got to stand out. You've got to bring something, rather than really the reality that the smaller the unit, the better. There's a lot of thinking now that shows that if you work as a team, if you work in a purpose-built way and you keep it simple, 6 to 8 people maybe, then the chances are that dysfunction where people are second guessing each other and going, oh, well, I better come up with a great idea because, all of that becomes irrelevant. Because what matters is that everyone's doing good work for a reason, well recognized, well remunerated, supporting each other. I'm not trying to be naive, but what I'm saying is that for me, much of the old management systems about the way the world of work has existed have been deeply, deeply wrong and dysfunctional. I mean, for instance, the 360-degree review. Please God, can that stop tonight at midnight? I mean, I just don't believe in it ever. I just don't believe in it. Now, maybe that's because I'm an entrepreneur and I'm not part of an enormous, gigantic structure, blah, blah, blah. For me, that's keeping it simple, calling it out and saying, that's actually bullshit. But the difficulty is when your life is on the line and your job is on the line and everybody is part of this incredibly complex system and nobody really knows where the boundaries are and what the values are, then you get the repeatability and the expansion. You see it very clearly, I think, in watching the way the pandemic has been handled. And if you look at the British example of the vaccine, that is a perfect example of simplicity. The woman in charge of the vaccines did 2 things. 2 is part of the 6. 1, 2, 3 fold into the 6. She did 2 things and 2 things only with a small group of people, not much bigger than 6, on Zoom, Kate Bingham. And those 2 things were spread bet against different vaccines and trial them so that when the vaccines are ready, you know which ones work. That's it. Now, there's lots and lots and lots of things that every government around the world was always going to get wrong in a pandemic, and the British government more than most, actually, but not that.
That was a lovely detailed answer. And I do want to ask one more question, but I also see a lot more questions out here, Louise. I'm going to ask you to guide us through all the questions out there. Guys, please share your questions. We'll try to answer as much of them as possible. Louise, back to you.
Thanks very much. You threw me there for a minute, Prakash, by saying I've one more question and, and then back over to me. So it's super. So Julia, right back at the start of the chat, one of our members put a question to you, which comes in very well now as we're talking about the pandemic. Joanne, you had a question early back in the chat. Do you remember which one it was, Joanne, about the pandemic?
Yeah, no,
Thanks, Joanne.
Put it back in. Thanks, Louise. Yeah, no, that's I've really enjoyed your talk this afternoon, Julia. And I didn't actually. I was wondering who had made the decision about the vaccines and the vaccine, and I hadn't heard that it was actually a Kate. A woman,
Bingham.
First of all, and Kate Bingham. So, no, because it has been absolutely, the management of it has been, the rollout itself has just been absolutely amazing. But what my question was about how a lot of people have said to me, well, a lot of parents actually have said, like, oh, well, once the kids start going back to their activities, and things are going to ramp up again, and we're going to be tearing around doing, and that they actually discovered that in lockdown they had more time to spend with their kids and they actually enjoyed it and they had more time together. But I can see it almost changing. Like, obviously here in the UK, things are beginning to open up and things are getting back, and it's like everybody's getting back into their normal routine and things like that. But so is it sustainable, or do you think we'll adopt is this an opportunity to adopt? Do you think people will adopt some of the simplicity of the pandemic, or will we start into the
So,
frenzy again? I'm,
yeah,
what's your prediction?
Well, I think there was a brutal enforced simplicity with quarantines, and quite a lot of people, it was very much divided. If you had space and outdoor space, and possibly not very, very young children, and if you were not adversely affected directly by COVID, then many of us have had a good war. Simplicity's had a good PR campaign. Lots of people have connected to the idea that they don't want to go back to the frenzied, frantic, always on, overstuffed routine. And I think some of that will remain. I think that some people will want a more calm and less frantic existence. And we know, which is why my next project is called the Nowhere Office. And, I'd love you to listen to the podcast and download that paper too. We absolutely know that the world of work is changing, that it is going to be a hybrid future. So there's a certain amount of not putting the genie back in the bottle. But on the other hand, inevitably, curious, complicated beings that we are going to fatten back up again. We're going to come off the diet, the enforced diet, and we're going to start snacking again. What I would say is that the simplicity principle does connect us to limits and boundaries and choices. And one of the things I think that revolves around time. So time is the absolute anchor. If there's one thing you do to embrace simplicity, regardless of where you work, how you work, what you do, is treat your calendar and your schedule like your body, which is only put something in it that you think isn't going to poison you, isn't going to pollute you, is going to be enjoyable, and that you've chosen. Because the big fantasy about technology is that somehow we can stretch time. Well, we can't. There are only 168 hours in the week. There only ever were. There only are 168 hours in the week. A third of those, basically, we sleep. It's difficult not to spend a third of those doing intermediary synaptic things rather than actual things. So the reality is, I like us to, divide our days into time zones, 6 time zones, because really most of us are up, awake for about 15 hours a day, roughly speaking. Most of us need up to 8 hours sleep. I'm not talking about the margins of some people who need a lot less or a lot more. Most of us are up for 15 hours, but 3 hours a day, without a question, are literally spent going to the loo, dressing, getting somebody ready, eating, getting in the car, not getting in the car, fiddling with your headphones, whatever. So, we have to discount 3 hours just to kind of whatever. And then that leaves 12 hours. Nice. 2 times 6 is 12. So roughly speaking, the question is, how do we play with the 6 and the 6? Do we do, I think that we all have process that we need to deal with every day. Handling emails, handling messages, handling prioritizing and to-do list, or washing, or getting a child dressed, or getting somebody, process stuff in our lives. We all have personal stuff now, whether that's our meditation or our run or our exercise or our health. I've actually got quite a complex eye condition at the moment that's taking up a lot of my personal time, dealing with specialists, trying to figure out what I need to do about that. And then there's what I would call project time, which is the work. The work could be you're doing your garden. The work could be the work that's got to get done. And so for me, the simplicity principle is respecting those natural rhythms and behaviors and boundaries, which kind of brings me back to the bees. The bees store what they produce. ready for when they need it, in the most resilient shape and space. They are both adaptable to stuff that comes up, but they are also highly regulated by the rhythms of what's natural to them. And so I see the Simplicity Principle as embodying this moment that is actually rather fantastic, where we are aligned for the first time in probably 100 years to the person we are as an individual and the person we are as a professional. And for the first time in probably 30 years, the technology is now really making it possible to design and shape our environment. And so I want us to make great choices and have great outcomes. And the 6 core themes I chose in the book are not the absolute abiding 6, but it might be helpful for me just to say super briefly that they are clarity. You're not clear about what's going on for you, whether it's what do we need to do as a team or what's going on for me in my head, then it's all a big pea soup and that's a problem. So clarity, decision-making, attention, focus, all of that is first. It's the top of the list. The second is at a kind of generalized level, individuality. Are you a morning person? Are you an autistic person? Are you a person who, has a particular, who are you? You have to bring that into the way you design and shape your work and your life. And then the idea of reset, which is this always on push forward, upward, the growth model. We know that doesn't work. So resetting, to rejuvenate or to be innovative and to be creative. So the first half of the hexagon, and by the way, I do advocate you think in half a hexagon as well, dividing up the shapes. The first half of the hexagon is clarity, individuality, and reset. And the second half of the hexagon is what I call the knot of social health, that in the same way that in physical and mental health, there are really only 3, half a hexagon, of factors worldwide that haven't changed and won't change, which is diet, exercise, and sleep, are the underpinning mechanisms of health wherever you are in the world at any given time. And the underpinning of social health, which is connected behavior of humans and machines in this era, I believe are knowledge, what you know, what you trust, what you take in and when and how and what format and what you share, networks, because we cannot do it alone, and who we know and who we don't know and how we connect and how we manage those relationships and how we collaborate, all guided by time frame, timeline, hours in the day. So for me, it's all just about a framework and then about choices within that framework.
Thank you, Julia. Such a great answer there. Thank you, Joanne. Very good question. I'd like to bring in SK, if you don't mind joining us, SK. You put a very good question in the chat. Thank you.
So Julia, I guess, sorry. I guess
that was a great intervention.
The question is about selling simplicity in organizations. And I guess my experience has been that, you deal with 30 individuals and you ask them what their biggest problem is, and everyone will invariably say that we are too complex an organization and we need to simplify ourselves. But then when you try to sell a solution that actually simplifies something, these 30 people as a team somehow will gravitate towards the more complex solution. And this is probably where my question was, that how do you sell simplicity to organizations that are heavily biased towards buying, maintaining, and to a large extent even growing complexity, because complexity obviously, maybe to some extent, on the dark side, maybe guarantees job protection and makes people's lives more certain to some extent. So how do you sell simplicity in organization based on your experience?
Well, it's a wonderful question and I'm really interested in it. Of course, simplicity is used as a fabulous selling tool. I mean, I think somebody posted at the beginning about Steve Jobs. Commerce is littered with the examples where the brand of simplicity is sold to customers precisely because a part of us craves it. So that's the first thing. I think there are many, many factors why organizations become dysfunctional. Some of it is political, some of it is vested interest, some of it is a different kind of selling. You know, you're selling values and marketing. And I mean, this is the big, very welcome question that's going on at the moment about purpose. And it's aligning with the new generation of Gen Zs and the environment and pollution. And so that's why I think it's such an important, exciting moment where there's a real opportunity for leaders and managers and participants in the world of work to go, hang on a minute. I have a different simplicity strategy for organizations from the book, which I've iterated since the book and which is going to be published in a couple of weeks in Strategy and Business. I'm very happy to share it with you. It is a 6-word acronym called ACCEPT, ACCEPT. And I'm beginning now to consult with companies about how that will work for them. And it stands for alignment, clarity, collaboration, ease, productivity, and time management. Alignment. Are we on the same page? You know, is that bloke over there in the office telling us one thing? What if you don't have alignment, forget it. Clarity, I've talked about that. You can't overstate the importance of clarity. Everything flows from it, communication internally, externally, not missing things. That, you know, that's why clarity is key. Collaboration, it is, the future is teams. Leadership is going to be about enabling as we go forward. Leadership is going to be like parenting, allowing the blossoming of the people in your family rather than the top down, you know, I am a leader, capital L. Collaboration is particularly interesting given the moment that we've got with technology. Lots of interesting developments in IT around that we're moving away from the sort of park it in a cloud on a platform, but via email, two-dimensional, unbelievably complex, to the kind of stuff that Cal Newport writes about, that Harvard writes about, that, dare I say, I write about, which is how do you actually hear what you say and come up with the most simple, straightforward gathering system for intelligence. E is for ease, precisely because we have a complexity bias, precisely because if we don't focus on pulling away from our natural tendencies, which is to get, you know, we think in our heuristic is that, oh, if we make it a bit more complicated, that's great. Our shortcut is to make it more complicated. And in fact, I believe we should be saying, if it feels easy, that may be because it is easy, that may be because it's more memorable, that may be because it's more simple. Productivity, because I know it's a longer conversation, but I think what is the point of doing any work at all unless you're going to be productive, unless you feel productive, unless you can feel the product? I mean, what are you getting up at the morning for? And I think we need to put the P word into the room, but it's got to work within the time frame. And so I think keeping it simple is possible, but you have to kind of want it. You know, like the famous joke about the Californian psychoanalyst. How many Californian psychoanalysts does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is 1, but the light bulb has to really want to change. So there is no absolute solution, right? There's no mechanism that can pull us out of a nosedive. We have to want it.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Julia. Thanks, SK. That was a great question. And there's lots of chat going on about needing to return to simple lives, Kathleen, and Renusha pointing out that a simple app like Instagram has now just gone on to become so much more than it is. So it's illustrating, like you say, Julia, this tendency that we have to, when things develop, just make them more and more complicated. Sunil asking about whether there's an overlap between your book and 12 Rules for Life, the Jordan Peterson book. And Mariah, I like your comment, Mariah, about the number of hours we work, which, as Julia was talking about, would you like to just have a chat about that, Mariah? Because 8 hours isn't a good working length of time, as if we've read about productivity, and we can't work for that length of time.
Right. So the question is, if I look, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a morning person, so I have figured out over time that my most productive time when I need to solve the most complex issues is in the morning. And then I transition to other things, which I call mundane, just opening mail, maybe I'm in the kitchen cooking, that relaxes me. So I have learned that 8 hours, if you want to plug me in for 8 hours, ain't going anywhere. But I do work as an entrepreneur. If I clock in and clock out, probably more than 12 hours, 14 hours, because I'm a nurse. So I've been used to those 12-hour shifts and I love them. So taking that 8 hours, I know in an organization, 8 hours plugged in, nobody will be productive 100% of the time. How can we convince organizations to allow us that playtime? And for me, as I'm building this company, what could I do for my employees? I mean, I don't want to say, oh, you're coming to work with me, it'll be only 6 hours. But how can we allow people to have that playtime to be then more productive, to realize more within that 6 hour that is really main bread and butter?
Well, I think I'm optimistic that we are not only having those conversations, but that the models are going to start changing because of the pandemic. So what I think is that the pandemic lifted the lid on a number of desires for a, new way of looking at what our simple needs are, which is to not have the old industrial day of 8 hours presenteeism. So I'm arguing, again, there's this overlap between the Simplicity Principle and the Nowhere Office. I'm arguing that time and place as fixed silos are really coming to an end. And what's coming in with hybrid and flexibilism, as I call it, is an adjustment to purpose and meaning, in which if you can connect to the motivation because the workplace is supporting you and is hearing you and is giving you great environment and there's a point to it, it doesn't matter when and how you work. I mean, we tend to follow rigid rules, whereas in fact, we need to think what the rule is for us right now. We're very dynamic creatures. In fact, I was just reading an interesting paper on motivation. It was a foundational theories of human motivation by some people from the University of Florida that I just came across, and they're big fans of Maslow, and I'm a big fan of Maslow. And the truth is that they are concluding, as did Maslow, that our needs are in fact multi-directional. My need on a Monday isn't my need on a Tuesday. My need at 56 isn't the need I had when I was 35. My need, if I've got a kid of 3, is not the same as the need I have with my mother who has dementia, who's 89. Different moments, different needs, different industry, different requirements. Now, the challenge for leaders is to say, what does success look like? What does productivity look like? But I think it was SK's point, there's a lot of vested interest that might be preventing those conversations from being had. But the power is now with us. The power is with us as the employees, as the workers, because the corporation of tomorrow needs to appeal to a generation that wants purpose and meaning, value. Corporation of tomorrow has got to adapt to those of us who control the means of production, which is we have the tools of technology, we have our skills, and we have that unique thing that AI is nowhere near having, which is our intuition and our ability to believe and to imagine and to create stories, all the complex stuff. But it doesn't mean that we have to be tied into a complex system that isn't right for us. So the reality is, Remote.io is a company that came out of GitLab, lots of digitally first businesses, but they connect 6 times a day with their workers. You know, you still have to do the human stuff, which is to look into each other's eyes and faces and voices to the best of your ability and say, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you thinking? One of the best business books I've ever read actually is by the Chip and Dan Heath, called The Switch, How Small Change Makes Big Change Happen. I don't know if anyone's read that. It's a terrific book. And it's very much about that question of what does success looks like. And it talks about leadership as setting the path. And it comes up with a wonderful visual image, not of bees, but of elephants. That the elephant, which is of course such a beautiful, intuitive creature, is very large and very lumbering. You can't just an elephant doesn't just go in circles like a mouse might, or the elephant is slow like a tanker. And the rider on the elephant is the leader. But the elephant is not going to go where the rider wants it to go unless it feels good about it. The rider can't just hit the elephant and say, go. Doesn't work like that. And so it's really talking about motivation, alignment, clarity, all those things that I've turned into the Simplicity strategy. But the switch theory says the leader sets the path. The leader gives the elephant, the team, the motivation to go somewhere, which is to say, this is where we're going. This is the vision. This is the destination. This is where we're going. And then the elephant goes, all right, then I'm going there too. Do you see what I mean? And so there was a wonderful case study to that point, simple, which is a group of American hospitals where there were lots and lots of unnecessary deaths through accident. And this particular leader took over, and instead of doing what every leader had done before, which is to look at the data and to do something that everybody else did, this leader called everybody in from, I think it was 70 different units and hospitals around America, and said, success looks like in a year's time, we will have saved 100,000 lives, prevented 100,000 deaths. We will have more weddings, less funerals, more marriages, more births, because of the way we're now going to work. That's the path. Is that are you with me? And then they set about some really simple adjustments, again, to SK's point and to Prakash's point. And really the biggest simple adjustment was that one group going off shift and another group coming on shift connect and intersect, just like two little sides of the hexagon. Shift 1 finishes, shift 2 begins, and there's got to be an intersection. And shift 1 says to shift 2. And I got very interested in that. And then, in fact, my husband had major surgery 6 years ago, and he was in the ICU unit, and everything was fine. Then there was a problem. He needed an urgent intervention. That went fine. As he was about to be moved down to the normal ward, a nurse said, wait, the charts are not conveying what happened with the intervention. I need to make sure that the ward that he goes to understands that he's had the intervention. And I've never been more grateful to a human being in my life. So it's about designing space, I think, which is again why I'm in love with my hexagon and my bees.
It almost sounds, Julia, for an entrepreneur, you have to sell the dream to your team so that they buy into your vision.
Of course, I'm an entrepreneur. Of course.
Mhm.
Of course,
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mariah. Great question. Thank you so much, Julia, for your really super detailed responses to all of our members' questions today. I'd really like to thank you on behalf of everybody.
Oh, my
for
pleasure.
joining
I
us
hope it's been
today.
helpful. It's always so interesting. Please find me on LinkedIn. Please email me. Be very happy to continue the conversations.
Thank you. That's so generous, because there are still plenty more questions coming up in the chat, but everyone knows I'm very strict about the time. We've all joined on our Saturdays in our own time. So we're going to wrap up the event. Thanks, everybody.
I will just say, I do have a newsletter on the simplicityprinciple.info, and my newsletter is called Half a Hexagon. And I share the latest thinking on books. I always feature at least 2 books every fortnight, and a little bit about what I'm thinking and up to. So if anyone is interested, you just go to simplicityprinciple.info and sign up to the newsletter. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us, Julia. Thank you, all of our members, for joining us. Hope to see you again at the same time next week, when we'll be joined by Denise Hampson, who's here with us today. Her new book is called Desire Code, and we'll be talking about behavioural science, the design of engaging products and experiences. And I think it'll be very interesting. So thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Prakash. Thanks, Julia. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next week, same time, same place.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.